This is Atomic Shinobi, and today I'm going to narrate what if Naruto was the second son of Hashirama and Mito. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
Everything was going well for the residents of Konoha no Sato, a recently established village. 1. The village was operating smoothly, and everything was quiet. Nearly every villager was content. Unfortunately for one man, he was among the few who weren't. A voice screamed, "Ouch! This hurts so much," so loudly that it seemed to reverberate throughout the hospital. The voice belonged to a woman from the famous Uzumaki clan named Naruto Senju, formerly known as Mito Uzumaki. Very few people could match the woman's true beauty. Normally, the woman's waist length, cherry red hair was styled into two buns on her head, but during the birthing process, it fell out and was now spread out on the white pillows she was resting on. The pain and strain of childbirth had caused her pale skin to flush red. Her face had delicate features and was shaped like a heart. She had lovely violet eyes that were clenched shut and a diamond in the shape of a dark purple on her forehead. Her jaws clenched and her pink, plump lips were set in a frown. The standard issue hospital gown concealed her stunning figure, which included long toned legs, a swollen but still slightly toned stomach, wide hips, and C-cup breasts. All things considered, the women had gorgeous, exotic appearances that many people wished they had. Mito squeezed her faithful husband's hand, breaking and mutilating it even more as another powerful contraction struck. Despite his slight paleness and wince at the pain, her husband Hashirama remained silent. Hashirama's attractive tanned face was framed by his waist-length black hair. His eyes were warm brown and currently focused on his wife's quivering body. He was dressed in red samurai armor over a basic black bodysuit. In a soft voice, he whispered, "I know dear, I know. Just keep pushing and it will all be over soon." Gently, he raised his good hand and caressed her crimson hair. She rubbed against his hand and whimpered. One of the nurses shouted, "Just one more push, Mito." Sama, after gathering her remaining strength, Mito gave it one last push before collapsing onto the bed. Following a few tense seconds of silence, the room was filled with loud wails. Hashirama experienced a wave of fatherly pride and tears in his eyes. Before turning to face the nurse who was now holding their child, he turned back to his wife and kissed her tenderly on the lips. "He's a healthy 8-pound boy," the nurse exclaimed as she gave the baby one last look before giving it to an ecstatic Mito and leaving the room. The moment the child was in Mito's arms, his cries abruptly stopped, and he raised his wide, inquisitive eyes to her. "He's so gorgeous, Hashi-kun. Look, he even has my mother's eyes," Mito exclaimed as he gazed at their son, who had red hair that stood up on his head, tan skin that was soft to the touch, a round face, and plump cheeks with 3 whisker-like marks on them because Mito had started dating a female Jinchuriki. However, the boy's bright sky blue eyes were what Mito fell in love with right away. "He's gorgeous, my dear," Hashirama said excitedly. "Now, have you decided on a name? It's only fair since I named our first child." Mito rolled her eyes at her husband's immature behavior, then grinned warmly down at her son. "What about Naruto Senju? After 5 years, only a few people in the Senju clan compound are aware of the mile-wide garden in the center of the circular compound, which is home to a wide variety of plants and animals. One of the few who are aware of it is now strolling through the garden while carrying a small sapling that his father asked him to plant before leaving for work. If one looked closely, they would notice the Senju clan symbol on the child's arm and the Uzumaki clan symbol on the back of the kimono. The figure was a small child, a boy, with shining blue eyes and shoulder-length, slightly spiked blood-red hair. He was wearing a red long-sleeved kimono-like top with a black mesh shirt underneath it, as well as black knee-length shorts and black ninja sandals. After what seemed like an eternity of walking, the boy, Naruto Senju, the second-born son of the Shodai Hokage, Hiroshima, and Mito Senju, slowly made his way to an empty patch of ground where he could plant the little tree. Then, he started the delicate process of planting the plant. While most 5-year-olds were out playing with friends and acting like kids, Naruto was reading, practicing his ninja skills, or just lounging in the garden. He didn't have any friends his own age because of his antisocial behavior, and he began to think about himself as he planted. It wasn't until 2 minutes after the hour that he realized someone was hurrying toward him because he was so focused on the task at hand. Crunch. As Naruto looked down at the now smashed plant, he was genuinely shocked to see that a gray sandal larger than his own was resting atop the plant. "Whoa, I apologize for not seeing you there, Naru," a terrified voice said, and Naruto slowly raised his head to study the person's figure, noticing the calf-length red pants and gray top. When he finally reached the person's face, he noticed features that resembled his own. Given his brown eyes, pale complexion, and black hair pulled back in a small, sleek ponytail, he instantly recognized the boy as his 12-year-old brother, Toharu Senju. 2. Ni-san. Why don't you always pay attention to where you go? My plant was just crushed by you. Toharu couldn't help but wilt under the glare his younger brother gave him, which, to be honest, looked exactly like the one his mother and father would give him when they were too noisy. Naruto said this in a quiet but angry voice. All right, I apologize. Toharu gave Naruto puppy dog eyes and said, I swear, if you forgive me, I'll make it up to you. Naruto scowled at him before letting out a quiet sigh. All right. With a final tone, Naruto said, but I'll only forgive you if you can teach me how to make storage seals. His brother gave him a thoughtful look before grinning broadly and yelling, yes. Naruto then watched as his brother ran into the house to do. Naruto turned around, his face displaying pain as he gazed at the plant. Then, like a flash of lightning, Naruto thought, wish I could help it. He covered the plant with his hands and concentrated chakra in his palms. Inside the house, as she made lunch for her children, Mito Senju stood over the stove, humming softly, wearing a yellow kimono with a high collar and white pants underneath. When she heard the door slam, she turned around to see her oldest child practically skip through the door. Sochi, how was your day? Mito asked, giving Toharu a kind smile. Chan, 4. It was fantastic. Mito laughed lightly at her son's vivacious demeanor, but her good mood was dashed when a massive chakra surge tore through the compound, followed by a mini earthquake that instantly made her tense. Me and Hiruzen had a spar mock which I totally won, Toharu said smugly. She took out a kunai and crept toward the garden, which was the source of the chakra. She expected to see an intruder who had used a powerful jutsu, but instead she saw a huge tree that had obviously never been there before and no enemies. As the dust settled, she noticed a small body lying in front of the tree, and her blood ran cold when she saw the familiar red hair coloring that she had memorized over the years. The tree was so big that it easily towered over the others, and its roots were so big that they had come out of the ground, splitting it and uprooting several smaller trees and plants in the process. Naruto. Mito let out a worried scream, hoping that by calling his name, he would move, but when he didn't, she became even more alarmed. When Mito reached her son, she ducked under tree limbs and hopped over fallen plants that stood in her way, running as fast as her long kimono would allow. She frantically checked him for wounds, but all she found were scrapes and bruises, which didn't make her worries any less. Naruto. Mito shook his little body and begged, open your eyes. After a few tense seconds, which seemed like hours, she felt him stir in her arms. She watched as his red lashes fluttered a little before his eyelids opened, revealing unfocused blue eyes. Naruto blinked a few times and gazed around in horror at the damage the tree had caused. Kami. Mito embraced Naruto tightly and said, don't worry me like that, Naruto. Did I do this? Ka-san? Mito stared down at her son, perplexed, unable to understand why he would believe that this was his fault. Naruto said softly. Sochi, why do you believe it was your fault? Mito said, and Naruto began telling the story of how Toharu had crushed the plant and how he had chosen to imitate his father's method of growing things because he wanted to try to keep the little tree alive. It would have been an understatement of the century to say that Mito was shocked. To be honest, she didn't think either of her children would inherit her husband's Kekkei Genkai. 5. But here was the evidence in front of her. Nevertheless, she picked up Naruto and proceeded to the tree, placing her hand on it, and slowly threading her chakra through it, discovering that it was indeed her son's chakra embedded in the tree. Does this imply that Naruto possesses two Sans abilities, Ka-chan? Mito sighed and nodded her head as Toharu asked, gazing up at the enormous tree in awe. Yes, Toharu, your brother has inherited the Mokuton, 6, your father's Kekkei Genkai. After 8 years, Naruto was calming his nerves by meditating early in the morning in one of the Senju compound's many training grounds. One wouldn't believe that he was short and scrawny as a child if they saw him. His red, spiked hair grew until it reached his shoulder blades. His body had muscles that fit his slender and fit frame rather than any fat because of the rigorous training his father, mother, brother, and uncle gave him. At just 13, he is also incredibly tall for his age, standing at 5 feet 9. And before you start making fun of his height, remember that I was 5 feet 10 inches at the age of 13, so don't be mean to me. He matured mentally as well as physically. As the son of one of the world's most formidable ninjas, his father made sure to educate him about the sacrifices and horrors of being a shinobi. But rather than making him afraid, It strengthened his resolve to be resilient and defend those who mattered to him. He became a Junin and one of the strongest in his village as a result of all that perseverance. He not only fully developed his Mokuton ability over the years, but he also succeeded in finishing his Senin mode, 7, just like his father. Because his mother was so skilled in Kenjutsu and Fuinjutsu, he was also very good at both. He was also somewhat proficient in Genjutsu, but he struggled to cast more powerful and effective Genjutsu due to his enormous chakra reserves, which he inherited from his Uzumaki ancestry. However, his ninjutsu abilities, which only his father, uncle, and older brother could match, more than made up for it. He created his own taijutsu style, which he named the Uzu Sutoraiku, 10, by combining elements of his mother's Uzumaki clan taijutsu, also known as the Dansu no Uzu, 9, which was based on flexibility and speed, with the Senju style, also known as the Mokusei no Ken, 8, which depended more on strength and the power behind one's attack. He had the strength to carry out his attacks, but he was also quick and nimble to block or avoid people. His style was unique, no one knew it, and it was very difficult to follow and counter if you didn't have a critical eye. "You're up early, son." Naruto broke out of his meditative state and got to his feet, stretching. When he realized it was his father, he turned to face him and grinned a little. His father still had the same appearance as when he was 20 years old, not like most 40-year-olds. The slight wrinkles around his eyes were the only indication of his advanced age. Naruto grinned sheepishly and remarked, "You know that I usually can't sleep the day before missions otou.san. 11. Since he had experienced the same thing, Hashirama simply nodded his head in understanding. Normally, his father had him working on something significant. With a cheeky smile, Hashirama said to his son, "Well, how about we have us a good spar to ease your mind, him?" Naruto shrugged after raising an eyebrow. Although he had to admit that he was a little thrilled to see how much he had improved in comparison to his father, Naruto nodded at his father and said, "Why not, we haven't had one in a while." He still accepted missions even though his father had relinquished the position of Hokage to Tobirama when he was 7 years old in order to concentrate on his son's training. Hashirama cockily folded his arms across his chest and remarked, "Yes. So only taijutsu and ninjutsu, that means no kenjutsu, genjutsu, fuinjutsu, or senjutsu." Naruto smiled a little and said, "Fine, I can do that." Since taijutsu and ninjutsu were his two strongest skills, he wasn't really at a disadvantage. Naruto shifted into his unique stance gradually and gave his father a fierce, determined look. He nodded in approval, then slipped into his own stance after noticing the fire in his youngest son's eyes. "Go," Hashirama said, his voice unusually calm, as he cautiously observed his son. Both of them are calculating and attempting to identify any shortcomings or faults in the other person's body language. Naruto, fed up with waiting, leapt forward and aimed a roundhouse kick at his father's head. With ease, Hashirama blocked it and punched Naruto in the bare chest. Using two hands to block the shot, Naruto used his flexibility to flip backwards and land on the ground unsteadily. His father was already running through hand signals by the time he got his bearings. "You recover too slow. Mokuton. Mokusatsu Shibari no Jutsu." He threw branches of wood at Naruto in a lightning, fast move. "Shit," swore Naruto as he ducked, flipped, and avoided the branches that were aimed at him. He saw that it became more difficult to avoid as smaller branches began to break off. He ran through his own hand seals while ducking beneath an approaching, larger branch. "Take this. Mokuton. Mokujoheki." Naruto was encircled by a protective wooden dome that splintered any branches that struck it. When Hashirama saw this, he stopped the technique and began a new one, only to have to barely avoid a blow to the middle. He was shocked to see Naruto smiling at him when he looked down. Hashirama leapt back, glanced at Naruto, and then turned back to the dome, where he was supposed to be concealed. He noticed a wooden representation of Naruto sitting there as the dome sank back into the ground. Hashirama turned to Naruto and said, "A wood clone, huh? Well, I guess you got me there." His expression was very serious, very different from the happy man a minute before. As Naruto watched his father, his muscles tensed and his eyes narrowed. He was aware that things were going to get much more difficult and that his father was being serious. His father was suddenly in front of him, punching him in the stomach and sending him flying into a nearby tree. Naruto yelled, "Fuck, that hurt," as he pulled himself up, squirming at the pain in his stomach. He rolled out of the way of his father's axe kick, which left a small crater where he had been, sensing an impending attack. Naruto cast his own jutsu during the time his father needed to recuperate. Doden. Doro Hoshi. Naruto slapped his hands on the floor and yelled. Hashirama had to jump in the hair to avoid a river of mud that was flowing in his direction. 6 wooden senbons embedded themselves in the tree next to his head as he landed on it and shifted his body slightly. He smirked as he jumped from branch to branch, avoiding the hail senbon, while looking down at his son, who was already producing more needles. He leapt from the tree and kicked Naruto in the head. Hashirama continued to pursue Naruto even after he sighed and avoided the kick. In addition to trying to return some of his own blows, but failing miserably, Naruto had to block every kick and punch his father threw at him. He took a hard side kick and fell hard to the ground. When he felt a sharp prick on his neck while attempting to stand, he realized it was a kunai. Hashirama looked down at his son, who was glaring up at him defiantly, and said, "Yelled." He applied a little more pressure, but not enough to cause the skin to break. Seeing that there was no escape from this side irritability, Naruto let out a sigh. "I yelled," he snarled, pushing the kunai away from his neck, getting to his feet, dusting off his trousers, and frowning. His spikes were then effectively squashed by a big hand on his head. While giving Naruto a loving pat on the head, Hashirama said, "Don't be ashamed of losing, son. It's all part of being a shinobi." This caused Naruto to blush a little. "I know Oto-san. But it's frustrating. I just want to be known for my own skills than rather being your son. But no matter how much I try I still can't beat you." He let his head hang slightly. Hashirama grinned sorrowfully as she gazed down at Naruto. "I see. I really know how you feel, truly I do. My father being our clan head made me a prince of some sorts. I honestly just wanted to be me, not what my clan or even my father want me to be. That drive to be different and to make my own name was the driving force for creating this village. It took me years of hard work and losing fights to get where I am. I'm telling you, son, that determination and that drive you have will lead you to greatness. All it takes is patience," Hashirama said with a broad grin. Naruto smiled back at his father as he cocked his head to look up. "Now come on, I'm pretty sure your mother is already making breakfast." Skip time. Front gate, Naruto frowned at his elder brother, who was currently giggling over the bruise his father had given him on his cheek during their previous fight. Toharu crackles, "Come on, don't look like that, you know it's funny." He hadn't changed much over the years, save for the fact that his black hair now stopped in the middle of his back and that he was now 6 feet 4 inches shorter than their father. His 6-month pregnant wife Miyuki reprimanded him, saying, "Oh, stop teasing him to Kun. I remember just last week when you came home looking 10 times worse after a spar with your father." Miyuki had blonde hair with brown flecks and was a spitfire. She also had kind eyes that were light gray in color. Mito, their mother, chuckled and said, "You know she's right, Sochi. You really shouldn't tease your brother." Toharu pouted and huffed angrily. Hashirama smiled at Naruto and chirped, "Now ladies, I think that's enough of teasing Toharu. What's really important is that this is Naruto's first S-rank mission." Smiling, Toharu said, "So Naruto, you nervous?" After a moment of contemplation, Naruto slowly nodded his head. Naruto acknowledged, "To be honest, I am a little anxious about the mission. Since all S-rank missions are classified, his family was obviously unaware of the specifics, but they still understood how important it was." While giving Naruto a hug, Mito said, "You'll be fine, Sochi. Just do the job and come back home safely, okay?" Before giving his mother another hug, Naruto grinned into her shoulder. "I will, I promise." They had no idea that because of unenforceable actions, this would be their last encounter with Naruto. As Naruto sat atop a tree and looked around for any indications of activity, the cool night breeze ruffled his red spikes. When Naruto discovered none, he eased up against the tree and unrolled his long-sleeved black shirt to show off the intricate black tattoos that ran the length of his arm. Choosing a storage seal in the shape of a swirl on his bicep, he directed a tiny quantity of chakra into it, causing a tiny red scroll to materialize in his eager hand. His calculating eyes opened the scroll, skimmed it, and committed the information to memory. Mission recipient. Naruto Senju S-class is the mission rank. Details of the mission. You must destroy a group of up to 20 renegade shinobi. According to information from our outside sources, the group of shinobi has been robbing small villages, capturing the women, and selling them as slaves. Make sure that nobody is left alive by using stealth to eliminate every member of the group. Slaves should be freed and sent back to their homes. With a signature, Hokage, Tobirama Senju the Naidame, 5. Naruto closed his eyes, leaned his head back, and replaced the scroll in his seal after finishing reading it. He took a deep breath to regain his composure and strength. He opened his eyes and peered out at the dim glow emanating from a sizable camp in the distance. This individual was not the same Naruto who smiled, laughed, and exuded innocence. No, this was a trained assassin who was cold-blooded and ruthless. Caution. The group of bandits were having a great time drinking and celebrating their largest haul to date, completely unaware of their imminent doom. The wealthy village of Sanbareji, 1, which is renowned for its beautiful green pastures, good crops, kind and non-violent residents, and even more beautiful women, had just been raided. He cried to a man in front of him, "Waramono Sama, you did a great job conquering that pitiful village. Their defenses had no chance against you." He was rather plump, with pale skin and short, oily hair. Brown hair was smoothed back out of the man's face, and he was known as Waramono Osama, too, by the other man. He was dressed in dark brown and rich green silk robes, and wore jewels on his fingers in a variety of hues. After grinning at his subordinate, Waramono grabbed a glass of the delicious red wine he had pilfered from one of the earlier villages and took a sip. Waramono snickered and smiled lecherously at a young woman with purple hair who was sitting in the far side of the tent with the other slaves. "Oh, Mayuri, I think you're giving them too little credit. As you can see, they were a peaceful village and their military was severely lacking. It was only a matter of time until they were taken over, and I couldn't let that happen now, could I? Because they had so many toys I want to play with first." All the men in the room howled with laughter as Yuri slapped a slave with glasses of sake on the ass, causing the poor slave girl to blush to the tips of her black hair. "Ah yes. You're so right, Waramono Sama. The rumors were quite true. I really didn't believe what they said about their women, but it is oh so true," Yuri cackled. Waramono stood up from the table, approached the purple-haired girl, and grabbed her arm roughly, causing her to scream in agony. They're true. Now if you excuse me, I have to take care of certain needs." Ignoring the cheers, whistles, and catcalls that followed him, he left the tent. He could swear he felt the glare of eyes on him as he trudged through the darkness with his unwilling victim at his side. He approached a big white tent, carefully opened the flap, and entered, being cautious not to step on the countless jewels and treasures inside. The slave girl's eyes widened as he approached the bed, finally realizing what he was going to do to her. She screamed, struggling in Waramono's tight hold, "Let me go, you pervert." After deciding he was not amused, he swiftly jerked her around until she was facing him, then gave her a hard slap that sent her flying onto the bed. As he gazed at his victim on the bed, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of pride as he saw the once silent and strong slave transform into a trembling, crying mess after only a slap and the faint suggestion of rape. With a sly smile, he removed his robes and tossed them on the ground. He climbed onto the bed and used his weight to pin the girl to her stomach. The girl thrashed, trying to hit me with her hands, and practically screamed, "Stop! Stop! Please stop, I'll do anything but this." However, her position prevented her from taking any action. With fake kindness dripping slowly off every word like molasses, Waramono purred, "Oh, don't worry darling, I'll take good care of you." The girl screamed in agony as he then completely encased himself in her. Waramono grunted and pushed inside the girl, who screamed and pleaded with him to stop, laughing gleefully. His sentence was interrupted by the sound of flesh being pierced, which reverberated throughout the room. "My, aren't you tight? Oh yes, you going to be my new PLA?" he said. He gazed down at the sword piercing his chest, his eyes glassy and wide with the immense pain that struck him like a freight train. As he took his last breaths, the steel blade streaked with his blood gleamed in the moonlight, taunting him. Then, with just as much ferocity as it had been thrust in, the sword was yanked from him. Waramono slowly fell to the ground, lifeless. The terrified slave girl slowly and unsteadily turned around and gazed down at Waramono's mangled body. Then she looked up at her potential killer and her supposed savior. She noticed a figure wearing all black from head to toe when she looked up. Beneath the tight clothing, the figure's broad shoulders and slender muscles were clearly visible. She could see that the individual was clearly male. She shivered not only from the chilly fall air that entered the tent but also from the figure's ice blue, slotted eyes that seemed to stare right into her soul, taking in everything from her sins to her good deeds. Without taking his eyes off her, she saw the figure reach behind him to grab something. She closed her eyes tightly and awaited the arrival of her inevitable doom. However, it never did. She felt a warm cloak draped over her in place of the cool blade. A slightly childish but masculine voice whispered, "Hurry up and leave this place." She opened her eyes wide and saw that he was gone, leaving only a few fallen leaves in his place. As Naruto made his way back to the tent through the woods, he was filled with a cold, boiling rage. Rape was not and would never be one of the many horrible, unspeakable things he did as a shinobi for the benefit of his village. Whether a woman is innocent or not, defiling and tainting her filled him with something unsightly. Ordinarily, murders like this would haunt him, causing him to suffer from severe insomnia for the next few weeks, along with a great deal of regret and sympathy, but repulsive people like these. They didn't deserve any As he approached the main tent, he noticed that the lights were out and heard frantic cries of confusion and rage coming from inside. The idea of making a couple shadow clones, having them turn off the lights, get the girls out, and then sealing the place up so that none of them could escape made him smile and give himself a mental pat on the back. He darkly sneered and flashed his longer than normal K9s, saying, "Showtime." There was a lot of confusion and rage inside the tent. For the 20 or so men who were there at the time, it was extremely uncomfortable, hot, and completely dark. It was shouted by someone in the crowd, "Is this some kind of joke? Turn the fucking lights back on, you bastard." He received an applause that was quickly cut short by a menacing laugh. A voice hissed throughout the tent, "Oh, I can assure you that this is no joke, it is very real." The men all searched the area in an attempt to locate the source of the voice, but they were unable to do so because it seemed to be coming from all directions. "Oh, and what are you gonna do, you asshole?" was a loud cry from a brave or extremely foolish soul. A deafening silence was all he received in return. They were soon gutted and sliced open by a hail of shuriken, kunai, and senbons, causing blood curdling screams to reverberate through the air. The blood that poured from the wounds turned everything a deadly shade of red. People were then decapitated, had their limbs thrown off, or were simply torn to shreds as the swords arrived. Before long, the cries stopped and were replaced by an eerie quiet. The once joyful, pristine scene was transformed into something that only the evil and the mentally ill could imagine by the abundance of bodies and their missing pieces. And there was one Naruto Senju standing amid all of that bloodshed. His icy gaze scanned the area for any survivors, but since there were none and his mission was complete, he turned to go. But not before he prayed, clasping his hands together, asking Kami for forgiveness rather than for the damned souls. "All right, it's safe now." Leaning his head against a tree's cool bark, Naruto sighed as he considered whether or not his line of work was truly what he wanted to do. Given that he was a ninja, he felt obligated to do it for his village. An instrument to safeguard Konoha's future. However, every time he took a life, his morals left him feeling numb and empty. He thought that he no longer felt guilty, and he laughed bitterly. A mocking voice snickered, "So much power really shouldn't be used by someone as pathetic as you." With a growl, Naruto leapt to his feet, drew his sword from its black sheath, and assumed his stance. His body tensed and his eyes narrowed as he listened to every sound. Naruto hissed, "Who the fuck are you and what the fuck do you want?" His voice was sharp as a new kunai and as cold as winter. "Oh, you don't know me, but I know everything about you, Naruto. You were born in the village of Konoha. Your parents are Mito Uzumaki and Hashirama Senju. You are a Junin and you are considered an A-rank threat and you are extremely skilled in all areas except Genjutsu." The person who said this seemed to appear from nowhere. The person's face was obscured by the large hood of the black ankle-length cloak that covered it. Naruto growled angrily, "Who gave you that information?" He had only 5 seconds left to rip the jerk's face off, hunt down the person who told him his entire life story, and chop off their head. The individual simply cocked their head to the side and laughed effeminately. "Oh. Nobody actually. After all, I have to know everything about the person I'm supposed to kill." The figure appeared before Naruto could blink, aiming a concealed blade at Naruto's face as it emerged from its sleeve. He leapt out of the way with a speed that only someone with years could have attained. Naruto swung his sword in a downward arc at the figure because the fugue was unsteady. The figure simply raised the blade that was obstructing the sword. Their blades were a blur as they battled at amazing speeds, sparks flying from colliding metal. The figure abruptly began running through hand seals after performing a well-timed black flip. Kaiten. Dai Enden no Jutsu. 1. Naruto was struck by a medium-sized fireball, which caused him to drive his sword into the ground and slash through his own hand seals. 2. Suiten. Teppodama no Jutsu. Naruto exhaled and hurled a big ball of condensed water directly at the fireball, causing it to sizzle to death. The figure cooed ominously, "Not bad. As much as I want to keep fighting you, I can't sadly, so let's just end this, shall we?" Narrowing his eyes, Naruto raised his sword. He saw the figure raise a one-handed hand seal just as he was ready to strike once more, and he froze all over. "What is this?" he exclaimed fiercely. Watching the figure slowly approach, he felt the perspiration trickle down his face. And he trembled with fear for the first time in more than 3 years. About 2 meters in front of him, he saw the figure come to a halt. The figure laughed and asked, "Are you scared, Naruto?" All Naruto could do was struggle against the invisible force holding him and snarl fiercely. While hyperventilating in fear, Naruto watched helplessly as the figure attempted to break through even more hand seals. "Well, you should be." At this, a black and dark purple vortex formed beneath him, releasing a tornado of wind. He was gradually seized by gold. Shining chains. All he saw before his world went dark was a red-haired head, blue eyes similar to his own, and a cunning grin. And he was forced to think. Kitsukoyaku, Uncle, 3. Konoha. Half a century from now. The Sandame, 4. Hiruzen Sarutobi, was having a terrible day. In the first place, he had trouble sleeping because of a nightmare in which all the people he had harmed and all the sins he had committed came back to haunt him. In the second place, he had just discovered evidence that Danzo's root program was not distributed, and he needed to come up with a suitable punishment for that. Finally, today was the anniversary of his best friend's death. He had a pile of papers nearly as tall as himself, full of complaints from the public about a red-headed demon. His aged eyes gazed down at the picture on his desk, which showed him and Naruto in a hot summer, holding buckets of paint and covered in mud, their eyes sparkling with long, lost childlike innocence. His worn lips pulled into a sad smile as he reflected on the bittersweet memories. Oh, how I have missed our friendship, Naruto, Toharu. Anbu appeared at his side, prepared to defend their leader if necessary, but his thoughts were short-lived as a massive power surge tore through the village, causing a mini-earthquake. The old man leapt from his seat and tore off his Hokage robes, revealing a full-length bodysuit with armor. Come on. Outside the village, somewhere a figure emerged from a steam-filled crater, slowly stretching its muscles and bones that were cracking from lack of use and from standing still for so long. Slowly, the figure's eyes opened, revealing to the world slitted blue eyes full of retaliation, anger, and treachery. Slowly, but surely, a hoarse, raspy voice was heard. I'm back. Naruto was furious. He had never felt so betrayed in his life, and he was furious beyond belief. He couldn't believe that his own uncle, with whom he had laughed and smiled, had not only attempted to kill him but also had the audacity to imprison him in some pocket dimension that God forbade. Being trapped in a black void with no other option but to scream had literally driven him insane, and he shuddered as he felt one of his many episodes of insanity approaching. Naruto was so furious that he failed to observe that the forest in which he had just woken up was very different from the one in which he had fought his uncle. Sarutobi narrowed his eyes and leapt into the clearing where the strong wave of power originated. Even though he was at least half a mile away, he could still feel the incredible amount of killer intent wash over him and his Anbu agents like a giant wave. He was certainly not prepared for the scene that greeted him, as 4 of the 10 Chunin and Junin he had sent were dead and covered in their own life fluid. Where is he? When he turned his head, he saw the face of someone he had assumed to be long dead. A voice that sounded somewhat familiar roared out with such force that it seemed to shake the trees surrounding them. Naruto? As he picked up his sword and beheaded an unwary Chunin, Naruto danced around a hail of kunai. You fucking bastards. Where is he? Where the hell are you hiding him? He growled and threw several shuriken at his opponent, who was dressed strangely. Naruto began to make various hand signals in frustration after he deflected them with a kunai. Mokuton. No jutsu, Sashiki. He threw long wooden pieces out of his hands at his adversaries, leaving them so stunned that they couldn't sleep. Naruto could have seen their astonishment and disbelief at his ability to employ a technique that only the first Hokage could have used if he had actually taken the time to observe their facial expressions. Naruto. The mention of his name caused his eyes to widen. He quickly turned in the direction it had come from and recognized the face. Even though the face was much older, he could still recognize the strong, almost regal tilt of his head, the high cheekbones, and the kind eyes. Naruto shouted, Hiruzen, what happened to you? The anger that had settled over him like a shroud vanished instantly because he was so shocked. Even as the Anbu agents clamped heavy shackles on his wrists, he dropped his sword and just looked at Hiruzen. Sarutobi moved slowly until he was 10 feet ahead of Naruto, and he inquired in a cool, extremely patient tone. He whispered, Naruto, how long do you think you were gone? Naruto scowled at him and tilted his head in perplexity. A week. Why? Naruto felt that he would not enjoy it for some reason. It was the Sandame Hokage who cried out, a week? Naruto, you've been missing 50 years. What? Oh no, when he was correct, he detested it. Tower of Hokage, Naruto screamed in a very unusual way, so you're telling me that I have been missing for not a week but for over 50 years? His jaw was set firmly on the floor in a humorous manner, and his eyes were wide. Then Sarutobi said casually, yes, Naruto, that is exactly what I'm telling you. Eager to see his family after a long absence, Naruto inquired, so, if you are here, where is Ka.san, 2.san, and Toharu.ni? With a note of sorrow in his voice, the old Kage said, pardon me, Naruto, but they are dead. He saw Naruto turn at least 3 shades pale and give him a look that seemed to be screaming to tell him that the joke was cruel and that he was joking. And his family was waiting for them safely at home. Unfortunately, they both knew that he wasn't joking. As despair and agony took over, Naruto swallowed hard. He blinked back his tears and silently promised himself that he would not cry until he was by himself. How? He asked, his face static and his voice cold. With a sigh, Hiruzen started. About 2 years after you went missing, the first ninja war started. And during it both Hashirama and Tobirama gave their lives to defeat the enemy. Because of this I was made Hokage, because they actually had faith in me, a young 20-2-year-old, to help them in their time of need. Your brother perished on a mission where he had used himself as a decoy so his teammates could get away. And his wife, Miyuki, died during the birth of their second son Nawaki, who was the Yondaime Hokage. And your mother died 12 years ago from old age. At this point Sarutobi Hiruzen, the Sandaime Ho, weeping. He was the Yondaime Hokage? Naruto inquired, his tone betraying his defeat. Yes, he passed away 12 years ago as a result of unexpected evil deeds, but that is a tale for another time, the Kage remarked, sadly wiping his eyes. Did they really miss me? The only thing that showed Naruto's intense emotional turmoil was his stuttering and his downcast eyes. Looking at Naruto, Sarutobi grinned bitterly, remembering that day he learned that Naruto had disappeared. It was etched indelibly in his mind. Flashback. Half a century. Hiruzen let out a deep sigh and stomped to the door as frantic knocks echoed through his home. All right. He was bowled over almost instantly after opening, and Toharu became alarmed. Here I come, damn it. Hiruzen. You must assist us in finding him. From his position on the cold, hard ground, Hiruzen frowned irritably as Toharu rambled and waved his hands wildly. Who are you looking for? Over his friend's obnoxious chatter, Hiruzen screamed. Naruto. After Tobirama gave them the location of his last mission, they were finally able to find a single clue, but that one clue crushed any remaining hope that Naruto would ever return home. They looked everywhere, but it seemed like he had simply up and disappeared without a trace, as if he had never been here in the first place. They discovered the Uzumaki and Dennis clan symbol, a necklace Mito had given Naruto on his 10th birthday, which featured 2 symbols. A red swirl and a brown two-sided pitchfork design. They all knew Naruto would never take it off and would never have left it or even misplaced it because it contained his chakra. My darling. My baby is where? Mito, who is typically regal, proud, and a little stoic, was crying uncontrollably while holding onto her husband's shirt in one hand and the necklace in the other. Sitting on the ground beside his heavily pregnant wife, Toharu was not feeling any better. The intensity of his sobs caused his shoulders to heave up and down. It's okay. He will return home. After all, he's our son, Hashirama remarked softly as he massaged his wife's back. Looking up at her husband, Mito gave him a gentle kiss on the lips and a watery smile. You're right, and we'll be here to welcome him when he does. In order to stop the tears from falling, Naruto clenched his eyes together and gritted his teeth. It was unfair because his family had been waiting for him and expecting him to return home, and by the time he does, everyone he loves and cares about has passed away. Sarutobi heard Naruto murmur, I want to go home. Naruto, I don't. Now, with agonized eyes, Naruto gazed up at Sarutobi and yelled. With a sigh, Sarutobi stood up and moved toward the door, hearing Naruto's footsteps behind him sound heavy and defeated. In the Senju home upon the summit of the Hokage mountain, it was clear that no one had lived here for a long time because the house was so dark, far from the cheerful, well-lit place he remembered, and there were spider webs and dust all over the place, along with obvious signs of decay on the outside. Sarutobi had just departed, but it required a great deal of persuasion. When he finally arrived at his former room, he heard the door click and entered after cutting his finger and smearing the blood on the old blood seal on the door, which glowed a vivid red. The only thing that was out of place in his room was the white envelopes that were sitting on his dark mahogany wooden desk. He padded over to the desk, picked them up, and went to sit on his king-sized bed. He would fed as a loud creaking noise reverberated throughout the empty house. He found his room exactly as he had left it, with a book on Fuinjutsu open on his nightstand, his shrunken and kunai still on the floor, as well as the tool he uses to sharpen them. He was shocked to discover that one of the envelopes he had picked up contained a letter from his brother, who had passed away. Greetings, bro. It's been more than a year since your little power trip, and your niece, Tsunade. What a cool name, is dying to meet you all. Hey idiot, where the hell are you already? However, that's most likely because she wants your money because she was addicted to gambling at the age of 1.5 months by someone, her father. I miss you, so please return quickly. Even Hiruzen, Miyuki, uncle, mom, and dad miss you. Thus, return here as soon as possible. The awesome, signed Senju Toharu. As Naruto finished reading his brother's foolish letter, tears fell onto the old paper. Something between a laugh and a sob escaped his lips. He took the second envelope and started to read it. Greetings, son. Most people would have assumed that I had pretended that you didn't exist or that I never loved you in the first place since you left. However, they would be completely mistaken. I try to avoid or even completely ignore conversations that are about you. It would seem to be motivated by hatred or apathy. Actually, though, it's because I love you. I worry that if I say you're gone, it might actually happen and you won't return to us. Yes, but many others gave up long ago. I'm still hoping you'll return home. I knew you were going to change the world the moment I held you, and I still do. In contrast to the others, I am aware that you are still out there and that, given your inner fire, you will return home to defend the village. I simply want you to know that you are loved and that I will always have faith in you. Your father, I sign this. He sobbed loudly before covering his mouth with his hand to try to block out the sounds that were coming through. As he picked up the final envelope, he saw that it had a red swirl on it. Of course, his mother's. Greetings, Sochi. You are missed. Since I can't go into your room and stroke your hair and whisper to wake you up, it feels like someone is sitting on my chest every day, and getting out of bed in the mornings is really difficult. People used to say that you were a loner and antisocial when you were younger, and I remember that. However, I knew better as your mother, the woman who carried you for 10 months and gave birth to you. Every time you were with us or you received praise, I could see how your eyes would light up. I would watch you chuckle like a child when you thought no one was watching, or conceal your hidden smiles behind the palm of your hand. I really miss all of those little things that I took for granted now that you're gone. However, I can sense it deep within my soul, so I know you're alive somewhere. Even if you don't return in my lifetime, I'm confident that you will. Even if, by the time you read this letter, we have all passed away, please know that you are loved and that we will always be keeping an eye on you. Love, your mom. At last, he lost all emotional control and screamed in agony and despair. Naruto cried out to the sky, Mom, Dad, brother, don't leave me alone. I don't want to be alone. He lay on his side in the bed, curling up in a ball and continuing to sob himself into blissful unconsciousness while clutching the letters to his chest as though they were the only thing keeping him afloat in a sea of despair. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon and illuminate Konoha with its rays. One of the few people who got up so early for a reason was Sarutobi Hiruzen. That was to see how Naruto was doing so he could make sure he was okay. He proceeded up the lengthy wooden staircase that led to the Senju compound situated atop the Hokage mountain. As he walked upstairs, he thought about what had happened the day before. When he first saw Naruto, he assumed that someone had obtained information about him and was impersonating him. However, he instantly recognized him when he saw the incredibly familiar stances and jutsu he employed. He acted very unlike a Hokage at the prospect of finding him after all this time. He was aware that he would need to administer some discipline. In the end, Naruto killed a couple Konoha ninja, which was absolutely unacceptable. He almost gasped in shock as he reached the top of the stairs and looked out over the Senju compound. Clone workers were swarming the once decomposed, haunted compound, cleaning and repairing it. Sarutobi was aware of Naruto's enormous chakra reserves due to his status as an Uzumaki, but it was still shocking to see how many clones there were. When a clone pulled on one of the long white sleeves of his Hokage robes, he was startled out of his reverie. The clone then fled to another group of clones repainting the house, saying, Hey old man. If you're looking for boss, he's in training ground in the back of the house. At his age, the Sandiami disregarded the insult and proceeded to the rear of the house. The house was crowded with clones who were dusting, painting, and cleaning, just like the outside. When Sarutobi finally reached the large compound's back door, his eyes widened significantly as he walked out. He saw more clones, which wasn't shocking because he had already seen so many, but what they were doing astounded them. More than 60 clones were training in various facets of ninja skills. He thought they were practicing senjutsu because 5 of them were meditating and absorbing nature energy. 10 were practicing taijutsu. 10 were practicing ninjutsu. 5 were attempting genjutsu, mostly unsuccessfully. 10 were practicing multiple chakra control exercises, and 10 were studying the art of fuinjutsu. After appearing out of nowhere and almost frightening the elderly man to death, Naruto snickered and asked, Hey old man, why the surprised face? Never seen this many clones before. A tick mark formed on his forehead as he heard the age crack once more, and he struck Naruto square in the head. Naruto scowled at Sarutobi and groaned loudly. Hiruzen teased Naruto by saying, You shouldn't disrespect you elders Naruto-kun. It's not good. This made Naruto glare at him even more. Hiruzen laughed and thought about Naruto's hair in a childish way, which made him growl. Returning to his Hokage mode, Sarutobi questioned, "So Naruto, aren't you tired from making all these wood clones?" He had to find out how much of his skills Naruto had kept hidden from him. Actually, they're not all wood clones. The ones working on the house are wood clones because they're more sturdier and don't dispelled as easily. While the ones back here are shadow clones because even though they get dispelled easily, I can learn from them, since every time they do get dispelled I get their memories, shorting the time that I have to learn a jutsu in half. And as for me being tired, I'm really not. Nonchalantly replied Naruto. Even more shocked, Sarutobi glanced down at Naruto. He was aware of the shadow clone jutsu's secret, but he didn't anticipate Naruto knowing it. He also didn't anticipate that he would be able to maintain two powerful chakra absorbing jutsu simultaneously. The Sandyami reflected fondly, "He surprises me more and more every time." Hiruzen asked sharply, "Well, why do you want to get strong in such a short amount of time? You just really got back." Naruto stared off into space, his face going blank. "I'm the only one left of my family. Because of this, many people will be after me and my family name, so I have to be strong in order to protect myself." He spoke quietly. Hiruzen gave him a dejected look and nodded in comprehension. However, he chose to keep the fact that Tsunade, Naruto's niece, was still alive a secret. "Well, I will do everything in my power to help you." Skip a little while later. Hiruzen looked at the young man seated in front of his desk and said, "Naruto, you do realize that you're going to need to pass a number of tests before you can become a ninja again, right?" "Yes, and I am more than willing to complete them," Naruto replied. Hiruzen gave an approving nod of his head. Hiruzen calmly remarked, "Well, Naruto, I hope you know that you're going to have to start off as a genin." Naruto's expression changed from one of surprise to rage in an instant. Naruto roared in outrage at being reduced to a mere genin when he was truly an elite Junin, asking, "What? Why the hell do I have to be a genin when I am clearly Junin level?" Hiruzen sighed loudly and fixed Naruto with a somewhat icy gaze. "One, because you have been gone for over 50 years. You have missed a lot of our history and the new teachings and systems the village has. Not only that, but you're 50 years behind in power and do need to get back in shape. 2. Imagine how suspicious it would look when you, a stranger, comes into the village and automatically gets a Junin rank. The council would be all over me because I let you, and because you killed several of our ninjas. And 3. I am the Hokage. I do what I think is best for the village and for its occupants. Me allowing you to have a Junin rank would put not only you in extreme danger but this whole village as well if someone were to find out about your bloodline. Now think about it, am I really all that wrong?" In stunned silence, Naruto sat. Hiruzen hadn't even considered it that way, but everything he had said was true. Naruto hung his head in embarrassment at his foolishness. He should have understood that Hiruzen was only attempting to protect him and the village because his father was a Hokage, not attempt to defraud him. Naruto calmly said, "You're right, I apologize, Hokage Sama." Hiruzen sighed as he gave Naruto a pitying glance. Naruto looked at Hiruzen and saw how old and tired he appeared. "You don't have to call me that, Naruto. But please understand where I'm coming from. I really am trying my best with you, so please work with me." When he was alive, the Hiruzen was intelligent and young. This individual had witnessed numerous atrocities and sacrificed a great deal for the village he still oversaw today. Naruto calmly remarked, "I understand. Hiruzen, all I ask is I be able to keep my family name. It's all I have left of my loved ones." Hiruzen considered his options while glancing at him. After some time, he nodded at last. "You can keep your family name. But you still have to talk to the council about it. Though the final decision is mine. Is that okay?" Hiruzen responded. Naruto smiled slightly and nodded. Beyond the tower with his hands in his pockets, Naruto strolled along the street. Many people were staring at him, he realized. He couldn't contain his laughter. Something would always be the same about Konoha. You would stand out like a sore thumb if you were new here because everyone knew one another. Naruto's empty stomach growled when he suddenly smelled something. He noticed a sign that read, "Ichiraku Ramen," when he looked up. Naruto shrugged as he passed through the thin curtain separating it from the exterior. Naruto proceeded to wait while perched on one of the counter's stools. He noticed that the kitchen was occupied by 2 workers. One was a young woman with brown hair tied back out of her face and brown eyes. Additionally, he noticed an elderly man who was preparing noodles and was roughly Hiruzen's age. The women noticed him, looked up, and smiled broadly at him. With a curious glance at Naruto, Ayame chirped, "Hello. My name is Ayame, and this is my father Tuchi. We will be serving you this evening. Now what do ya want?" She had no recollection of ever seeing him. I think I'll take a bowl of miso ramen please. Naruto replied. Before shouting the command to her father, Ayame smiled brightly at him once more. Ayame inquired, "Are you new here, if you don't mind?" Naruto told her that he was because he couldn't tell that she was acting maliciously. He lied and claimed to have taken a tour of the village when she asked him if he had done so. "Stop bothering the poor boy, Ayame." A deep voice laughed. The older man that Ayame had introduced as Tuchi was there when Naruto looked up. The man said amiably, "Here you go, son. Your first bowl of Ichiraku's special miso ramen." The two had such a cheerful attitude that Naruto couldn't help but smile. He quickly said, "Itadakimasu," and picked up the chopsticks before starting to eat. His mouth burst with vibrant flavors, causing him to sigh in delight. The ramen was just right because of the ideal balance of flavors and spices. As they observed his facial expressions, Ayame and Tuchi, who had been observing him, burst out laughing. Naruto pouted at the two and started eating his noodles, allowing a faint pink flush to appear on his cheeks. His face broke into a smile that was both bittersweet and unavoidable. He was envious that he was no longer able to laugh with his father in that way. Ayame scowled a little at the shift in his attitude. Quietly, she said, "Hey, what's got you so sad?" Startled, Naruto raised his head from his bowl. The fact that a stranger genuinely cared about him astounded him. He gave her a calculating glare while narrowing his eyes. He let out a sigh and informed her after realizing her sincerity. Naturally, omitting his family members' names and the time travel element. He was still not entirely sure he trusted them. Ayame was crying by the time he finished telling his story, and Tuchi exuded a solemn demeanor. However, Naruto was very appreciative of the pity or sympathetic looks that neither of them had. "Well, I don't think I could ever understand what you're going through, but my mother died when I was young as well. Me and my mother were coming back from short vacation when the carriage we were riding in was suddenly attacked by bandits. My mother died right in front of me defending me. I know your mother died as well, but at least your mother died happy and had at least written you some last words. My mother didn't get to say goodbye and she didn't die a peaceful death. So cheer up. I think you should use those last words that your family gave you and move on and make them proud. I really don't think that they would like you suffering and sulking," Ayame said with a tearful grin. Naruto was stunned into silence for the second time today. He turned to face Tuchi, who was also grinning at him. Naruto smiled brightly at them both and laughed to himself. At that moment, he realized that the three of them would begin a wonderful friendship. Tuchi laughed and made fun of Naruto for developing a ramen addiction. "Yeah, you're right. Now Tuchi-san, why don't you give me 2 more bowls? I'm starving," says Tuchi, which caused him to chuckle. Naruto was in a great mood when he left, his wallet a little lighter and his stomach full from 8 bowls of ramen. He made a new vow to himself as he gazed at the Hokage monument, which was one of the few things that had remained largely unchanged. His brother, father, uncle, and mother all died defending the village, which he would defend, and he would become the Hokage to accomplish that.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.